My name is Harper Collins. I'm 32, a project manager at a mid-sized IT company in Austin, Texas. If stories about family betrayal, survival, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself resonate with you, please subscribe, like, and share this channel. It means the world to me and helps me keep telling the truth without holding back. That Thursday evening, the Texas sky still glowed faintly pink, the kind of dusky warmth that usually makes the drive home feel comforting. My office shoes clicked against the parking garage concrete as I hurried to my car, thinking only about reheating leftovers and maybe answering a few overdue texts from friends. The roads were busy but familiar. IH-35 heading south into Austin, the same route I'd driven 100 times. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel when a semi roared past, rattling my small sedan. My body was tired, but my mind was already drifting toward the weekend. Then, in a heartbeat, everything changed. I remember the blare of a horn, too close, too sudden. My head snapped right just in time to see headlights barreling toward me at the intersection. An SUV blowing through a red light. God, no! The words ripped out of my throat before the impact hit. The crash was violent, metal against metal, like a giant hand had picked up my car and flung it sideways. The world spun, glass shattered, the seatbelt dug into my ribs, and a scream I didn't even recognize as my own filled the air. My car rolled once, then again, until it landed upside down, everything tilted and groaning. For a moment, there was silence. My chest burned. Every breath felt like knives. The coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. My phone, my purse, everything had spilled across the ceiling, now the floor above me. The faint sound of a country song was still playing from my car radio, distorted and haunting. A man's voice broke through the haze. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I blinked, vision doubled, to see a stranger crouching outside the shattered window. His phone was at his ear. "Stay with me, help's on the way." I wanted to answer, to say something, but all I managed was a groan. Panic clawed at me. What if I never walked again? What if I never got the chance to prove that I mattered outside of being the forgotten child? Red and blue lights blurred into my vision. Paramedics swarmed, voices quick and steady. Pulses weak, internal bleeding suspected. Hands worked swiftly to stabilize my neck. Another pair cut through my blouse to check my chest. I wanted to fight them, to ask for my parents, but words wouldn't come. The stretcher lifted me out of the wreckage, and cold night air rushed over my skin. Somewhere in the distance, traffic honked impatiently, as if the world hadn't just imploded. I caught a glimpse of my crumpled car, the roof crushed like a soda can, and a single terrifying thought slammed into me. I should be dead. The ambulance door shut. Inside, the paramedic leaned close. "You're lucky, ma'am. Just hang on a little longer." Lucky. The word echoed bitterly as pain tore through me. I wasn't sure what kind of luck left me broken and alone in the back of an ambulance, praying someone in my family might care enough to come. The sirens wailed, and Austin's city lights streaked past. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the oxygen mask, the clipped commands between medics, anything to block out the gnawing fear in my chest. But deep down, another thought crept in. If my parents knew, would they even come? Or would I still be second place to my brother's shining moment? That question burned in me as the hospital loomed ahead, a cold certainty taking shape. The crash was only the beginning of a much darker test of survival. The next thing I clearly remember after the blinding ambulance lights was waking up in a sterile white room. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only rhythm anchoring me back to reality. My body felt like it had been dismantled and stitched back together with razor wire. Every breath was sharp, every movement foreign. A nurse leaned over me, her badge reading Samantha. She adjusted the IV line and gave me a practiced smile. "You came through surgery fine, Harper. 2 broken ribs, a fractured leg, but you're stable now. You're going to need time to heal." Stable. The word should have comforted me, but instead, I felt small and fragile. My first instinct was to ask, did anyone come? My throat was raw, but I forced the words out. Samantha hesitated. That pause was louder than any answer. "We called your emergency contacts several times. We left messages. No one's been by yet, but maybe they're on their way." Yet. That single word felt like a stone in my stomach. Lying there, tubes snaking out of me, I pictured my mom rushing down the Dallas highway, my dad pacing nervously in the waiting room, my brother at least sending a text. That's what families do, right? Show up when the world nearly takes you away? But hours turned into a day turned into 4. Every few hours, I'd glance at my phone on the bedside table. Notifications lit up. Automated work emails, a DoorDash promotion, even a friend from college liking an old Instagram post. But no calls from my parents. No messages. I texted them myself. I was in a bad accident. Please come. Then, I had surgery. I'm in the hospital. I need you. No reply. By day 2, I tried to excuse it. Maybe Dad's phone was dead. Maybe Mom was caught up with something important. Maybe traffic between Dallas and Austin was holding them back. But by day 4, those excuses turned to dust. At night, the beeping of the monitor became unbearable. My chest ached not just from broken bones, but from the silence in my phone. I stared at the cracks in the hospital ceiling and thought, if I had died, would they even have noticed? Or would my brother's achievements still be the headline in their world? Friends from out of state called when they heard, "Harper, are you okay? Do you need anything?" They couldn't be there in person, but their voices were warm. Even a distant cousin from San Antonio managed to text me, saying she'd try to visit. Strangers felt closer than my own family. On the 6th day, a family acquaintance, Mrs. Green, who used to live next door to us back in Dallas, popped in, clutching a bouquet from the hospital gift shop. She gasped at the sight of me in bandages, then shook her head sympathetically. "It's such a shame your parents couldn't make it. But you must be so proud of Jonathan. That award ceremony in Houston was incredible. He gave such a moving speech." The words stabbed deeper than any broken rib. I blinked at her, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Award ceremony?" She nodded enthusiastically, unaware of the storm building in me. "Yes, they've been so busy with his big event. I thought you knew." My chest tightened, and this time it wasn't from the injuries. So that was it. They knew. They made a choice. Their son's shining moment mattered more than their daughter's survival. I thanked Mrs. Green politely, though my voice trembled. As soon as she left, I turned my face to the wall and let the tears finally fall. The betrayal wasn't new. It was a pattern stretching back to childhood. But this time, lying broken in a hospital bed, it felt final. And yet, I couldn't let go of the small, desperate hope that maybe tomorrow they'd walk through the door. Maybe tomorrow they'd remember I existed. By the 6th evening in the hospital, my room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the lilies someone had left on the windowsill. I was exhausted from waiting for a message, for the sound of familiar footsteps in the hallway, for anything that told me my parents remembered I existed. That's when Mrs. Green walked in. She used to be our neighbor back in Dallas, a sweet older woman who always baked pecan pies for the holidays. Her face lit up when she saw me sitting up in bed, my crutches leaning against the wall. "Oh, Harper, honey," she said, setting a small bouquet down on the table beside me. "You look so much better than I expected." Her kindness warmed me for a moment. "Thank you for coming," I murmured, my voice still raspy from days of silence. She pulled a chair close, her bracelets clinking as she adjusted herself. "Your parents must be so proud of you. It's been a hard week for them, with Jonathan's big award ceremony and everything else going on." The words hit me like a blow to the ribs. I straightened slowly, ignoring the pain. "Ceremony?" My tone came out sharper than intended. Mrs. Green tilted her head, surprised. "Yes, the corporate award in Houston. Didn't you hear? Jonathan was recognized in front of the entire company. It was such a beautiful event. Your mom wore the loveliest blue dress." She smiled as if sharing happy gossip. I stared at her, trying to process. My fingers clenched the blanket so tightly the fabric bunched under my nails. They knew I was lying here. They knew, and they chose him instead. Mrs. Green finally noticed the tension in my face. Her smile faltered. "Oh dear, I thought you knew. I just assumed." Her voice trailed off, awkward. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile. It's fine. Thank you for telling me. My throat ached with unshed tears. But when she left, the mask cracked. I pressed my palm to my chest, as if I could hold the broken pieces of my heart together. The image of my parents sitting in a ballroom in Houston, applauding Jonathan, while I lay alone in a hospital bed in Austin, seared into me. The betrayal wasn't a new wound. It was the reopening of an old scar. Since childhood, Jonathan had been the golden boy, the star, every spelling bee medal of his, every sports trophy, every scholarship offer, celebrated like a national holiday. My achievements? Quiet nods at best, or worse, ignored completely. But this was different. I had nearly died. And still, their choice was clear. The next morning, Samantha, the nurse, noticed my red-rimmed eyes. Rough night? She asked gently. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. You could say that. I typed out a message to my parents with trembling fingers. You knew I was in the hospital. You knew, and you still went to Houston. I could have died, and you didn't even call. This time I wasn't asking, I was accusing. I stared at the screen, waiting for those little dots of a reply to appear. But the phone stayed silent, mocking me with its stillness. My chest tightened, not just from the cracked ribs, but from the crushing weight of being unwanted. I thought of Jonathan on that stage, soaking in applause. I could almost hear my father's voice booming with pride, my mother beaming beside him. And then there was me, broken bones, stitches, fear, and not worth a glance. The realization cut deeper than any wound the crash had left me with. I wasn't simply forgotten. I had been replaced. The silence after Mrs. Green's visit was unbearable. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. My parents in Houston, dressed to the nines, applauding Jonathan while I was fighting through pain in a hospital bed. By the next morning, anger finally outpaced the ache in my ribs. My hands trembled as I typed, "You knew I was in the hospital. You knew, and you still chose his award. I could have died, and you didn't even call." I hit send and stared at the screen, my pulse pounding louder than the heart monitor beside me. For hours, nothing. Just the sterile hum of machines and the occasional nurse checking vitals. I almost convinced myself they'd ignore me again. Then my phone buzzed, a message from my mom. "Harper, you don't understand. We couldn't miss Jonathan's big night. It was once in a lifetime." My breath caught in my throat. I typed back furiously. "You could have come earlier. You could have called. Do you have any idea what it felt like to wake up after surgery, not knowing if I'd make it, and hear nothing from you?" The reply came quickly this time. "My dad. We're proud of Jonathan. He's worked hard for this. You'll be fine. Don't be dramatic." The words felt like a slap. I pressed my hand against my bandaged side, as if I could physically hold myself together. Fine? I almost died. How could they minimize that to nothing more than drama? I called them. I needed to hear their voices, to force them to hear mine. My mom picked up, her tone clipped, as if I'd interrupted something important. "Harper, sweetheart, we love you, but you're making this harder than it needs to be. Jonathan deserves our support." "And I didn't?" My voice cracked, tears spilling over. "I deserved at least one visit, one phone call. Do you know how empty it feels to watch strangers care more than your own parents?" There was a pause, muffled voices in the background. Then my dad's voice came on, hard and unyielding. "Your brother makes this family proud. You lying in a hospital doesn't change that. We can't waste time dwelling when he's out there achieving things that matter." The room spun, and not because of the medication. I couldn't believe he'd said it out loud. The hierarchy I'd always felt, but never heard confirmed. "You're saying my survival is a waste of time?" My voice was hoarse but steady. "Don't twist our words," my mom cut in, her voice rising. "You know Jonathan has always carried the family's reputation. He needed us. You're strong, Harper. You can handle being on your own." The betrayal sank in like ice water. I realized they didn't see me as fragile or resilient. They saw me as expendable. I hung up without another word. My hands shook as I placed the phone on the bedside table, my chest heaving. The tears came hot and fast, but underneath them, a different fire sparked, rage, not just at their choice, but at myself for still hoping they'd be different this time. I pressed my forehead to the cool metal of the bed rail and whispered into the silence, "I'm done being an afterthought." The moment I hung up the phone, their voices kept echoing in my head, my father praising Jonathan, my mother excusing their absence. It didn't feel new. It felt like stepping back into a pattern that had always been there, stitched into the fabric of my life. I closed my eyes, and the hospital ceiling faded into the memory of our old house in Dallas. I was 10, standing in the kitchen clutching a spelling bee ribbon I'd earned at school. "Look, Mom, I won second place," I had said, holding it up like it was a treasure. My mother barely glanced from the sink, where she was polishing Jonathan's soccer trophy. "That's nice, Harper, but Jonathan's team made it to regionals. Isn't that exciting?" Jonathan strutted into the room at that exact moment, his jersey still damp with sweat. Dad swept him up in a hug, his booming laugh filling the kitchen. "That's my boy, regional champs, here we come." I stood there, my ribbon dangling limply in my hand, the proud smile slipping from my face. No hug, no congratulations, just silence. The memory burned like fresh salt in an open wound. Another scene surfaced, high school graduation. I'd been accepted to a good state college, the first in my class to secure a scholarship for computer science. I'd hoped maybe, just maybe, my parents would beam with pride. Instead, Dad was too busy shaking Jonathan's hand. My brother had just landed an internship at a prestigious firm in Houston. "Jonathan's going places," Dad had told relatives at the party, his voice loud enough for me to hear across the lawn. "He'll put the Collins name on the map." I was there too, setting out plates of potato salad, pretending not to notice how no one asked me about my plans. Even the smallest moments carried the same weight. When I scored an A on a calculus test, Jonathan's C in economics got more attention because he was trying so hard. When I made the volleyball team, his minor sprain got sympathy and ice cream. It wasn't that Jonathan was cruel. He didn't push me down or steal the spotlight on purpose. He just lived in it naturally, while I was left in the shadows. And my parents? They never questioned it. To them, it was simple. He shined. I did not. Back in the hospital bed, I stared at the blank wall, tears sliding into my hairline. Their words from last night meshed perfectly with all those memories. "Your brother makes this family proud. You lying in a hospital doesn't change that." It was the same script, just updated for adulthood. I whispered into the quiet, "I've been invisible to them my whole life." My voice cracked, but saying it out loud gave shape to the truth I'd spent years denying. I tried to remember one moment, just one, where my parents had chosen me. Birthdays blurred together, holidays filled with Jonathan's achievements. Even Christmas morning felt like his stage. My gifts were practical, sweaters, notebooks. His were grand gestures, new guitar, tickets to games, trips to New York. The unfairness clawed at me, but deeper than anger was exhaustion. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their approval, hoping one more achievement, one more good grade, one more promotion would finally tip the scale. And still, here I was, bleeding and broken, left behind for another standing ovation. I pulled the hospital blanket tighter around my shoulders, letting the truth sink in. This wasn't just about the accident. It was about every moment that led up to it. My crash only exposed what had been true all along. I was never their priority. It was a week after the crash when the impossible finally happened. My parents walked into my hospital room. I'd stopped expecting them. I had stopped hoping. So when the door swung open and I saw my mother's neat curls and my father's stiff posture, I froze. For a split second, my chest lifted. I thought maybe they'd realized what they had done. Maybe they came to say, "We're sorry. We should have been here." Mom carried a bouquet of roses, their petals too perfect, too red. Dad set a gift bag on the side table, the kind you grab last minute from a gas station. "Sweetheart," Mom said brightly, her voice like she was greeting a neighbor at the grocery store. "You look so much better, doesn't she, Robert?" Dad nodded, scanning the room without really looking at me. "Doctor says you're walking again soon?" I stared, waiting for something real, an apology, concern, anything. I had emergency surgery, I whispered. I almost bled out on the table. I thought maybe you'd come sooner. Silence. My mother fiddled with the bouquet paper, and for a moment I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But then Dad cleared his throat. Well, you're fine now. That's what matters. He sat down stiffly in the chair across from my bed. And Harper, there's something we need to discuss. The tone in his voice made my stomach knot. This wasn't about me. My mom leaned forward, her hand brushing mine in a rehearsed gesture of comfort. You've always been responsible with money, dear. You've saved up, and we're proud of you for that. I stiffened. What does my savings have to do with anything? They exchanged a look. Dad spoke next. His voice clipped. Jonathan's in trouble. At his company in Houston, there's been an investigation. My heart sank. What kind of trouble? Mom's eyes welled with tears, but not for me. He's been accused of fraud. They say he diverted company funds, but it's just a misunderstanding, I'm sure. People are jealous of his success. I almost laughed. It came out more like a choked breath. Fraud? He's being charged. Dad leaned in, lowering his voice as if we were conspiring. We've already spent a fortune on attorneys, but the bail is high, too high. We need your help, Harper, just until things settle. There it was, not love, not remorse, just a request for my money. My hands clenched around the blanket. You ignored me when I almost died, but now you want me to bail him out? Mom's voice broke into pleading. He's your brother. Family takes care of each other. I shook my head, the words spilling out before I could stop them. No, family shows up. Family sits in the hospital when you're broken and scared. You left me alone, and now you want me to clean up his mess? Dad's expression hardened. Don't be selfish, Harper. Jonathan carries this family's name. He can't fall. My voice trembled, but I didn't back down. Then let him carry the consequences too. The air between us grew thick, heavy with things none of us dared to say out loud. They weren't here for me. They never had been. They were here to protect their golden boy, the only child who mattered. I leaned back against the pillows, my chest aching with something sharper than broken ribs. For the first time, I wasn't begging them to see me. I was seeing them clearly. For a long moment after my father's demand hung in the air, the hospital room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were leaning in. Their eyes were locked on me, not with concern for my broken body, but with expectation, with entitlement. I pulled the thin blanket higher over my lap, steadying my breath. My ribs ached with each inhale, but I refused to let my voice shake. No, I said finally. 2 letters, sharp and solid. My mother blinked as though she hadn't heard me correctly. What do you mean, no? Harper, this is your brother we're talking about. I know exactly who we're talking about, I shot back. My throat was tight, but the words burned their way out. The same brother you chose over me last week. The same brother you've chosen over me my entire life. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his jaw stiff. This isn't about the past. Jonathan needs us right now. You've got savings, a good job. It's your responsibility to step up. My laugh came out bitter, edged with tears. Responsibility? I begged for you to come when I was fighting for my life, and you didn't. Not one call, not one visit. Now suddenly I matter, but only as a wallet. Mom's composure cracked, her voice rising. That's not fair. We couldn't abandon Jonathan's award. It was once in a lifetime. You'll recover. Look at you. You're strong. He, on the other hand, could lose everything. The fire in my chest spread. I almost lost everything when that SUV hit me. I almost lost my life. And you call me strong like it's an excuse to neglect me. No, I won't pay for him. I won't rescue him. Not this time. Dad's hand slammed against the arm of the chair, startling me. You're selfish, Harper. Family sticks together. Do you want us to be humiliated? Do you want to watch your brother rot in jail while you sit on your money? I straightened, ignoring the stab of pain in my side. What I want, I said quietly, is to stop being treated like a spare part in my own family. You made your choice when you left me here. Now, I'm making mine. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. My mother's lips trembled, but instead of apology, more anger spilled out. You'll regret this. When we're gone, when Jonathan is the only family you have left, you'll regret turning your back. Her words sliced deep, but for once, I didn't flinch. I felt steady. My whole life I had bent under their approval, chased scraps of validation. And now, saying no, I felt more in control than ever before. I reached for the call button beside my bed. If you're going to keep yelling at me, you can leave. I'm still healing and I won't do this anymore. Dad stood abruptly, his face tight with fury. Mom followed, clutching the untouched roses as if she couldn't bear to leave them behind. At the door, she looked back, her eyes glossy with accusation instead of love. You're punishing us for caring about him more. That's cruel, Harper. Cruel. I turned my face toward the window, refusing to let them see me cry again. When the door finally clicked shut, the quiet wrapped around me. Not comforting, but liberating. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a line, and I wasn't about to step back over it. A week later, the doctors finally cleared me to leave. My ribs still ached with every breath, and I leaned heavily on the crutches. But I was ready to be home, to breathe familiar air, to feel safe in my own space. The cab dropped me at the front of my apartment building in Austin. I was rehearsing the small relief of sliding into my own bed when I noticed two figures near the entrance. My heart sank before my brain fully caught up. It was my parents. Mom straightened immediately, clutching her purse strap like it was a lifeline. Dad crossed his arms, his expression set in stone. They hadn't come to welcome me home. They'd come to fight. Harper, Mom said, her voice a mix of urgency and reproach. We need to talk. I tightened my grip on the crutch and took a steadying breath. You shouldn't be here. Dad's jaw ticked. We had no choice. You've left us no choice. I pushed past them toward the door, but they followed close behind, their words chasing me like shadows. Mom's voice rose. You don't understand what's at stake. Jonathan's entire future is on the line. If you would just help. I spun around, pain flaring in my side. Help? You left me bleeding in a hospital bed, and now you want me to clean up after him? No. Her eyes flashed. You're using this as revenge. You've always been jealous of him. And now you see a chance to punish us. That hit harder than I expected. My voice cracked, but I didn't back down. Jealous. I wanted a family, not a stage where I was invisible. I almost died, Mom. And you didn't even show up. If that's jealousy, then maybe I've been jealous of being treated like a daughter instead of a placeholder. Dad stepped closer, his presence towering. You're bitter, Harper. And bitter people make bad choices. Family stands together, even when it's hard. If you let him rot, that shame will be on you too. The fury that had simmered in me since the accident finally boiled over. No, that shame belongs to him, and to you for covering for him, not me. Silence fell, heavy and electric. My mother's eyes welled, but it wasn't sorrow for me. It was fear for him. If you let this happen, she whispered, we'll lose both our children. One to prison, and one to her own pride. Her words were meant to guilt me, but they only steeled my resolve. I raised my chin, meeting both their eyes. Then lose me, because I'm done begging for your love while you throw everything at him. I won't pay his bail. I won't fund his lawyers. I won't be your scapegoat. Dad's face reddened, and for a moment I thought he might shout. Instead, he spat. You'll regret this when we're gone. You'll regret turning your back on your own blood. I lifted my phone, thumb hovering over the keypad. If you don't leave, I'll call the police right now. That stopped them. The tension stretched thin, then snapped. My father muttered something under his breath I couldn't quite catch, and Mom clutched his arm, pulling him back. They retreated slowly, their anger thick in the air. When the door finally closed behind them, I pressed my forehead against it, tears sliding hot and fast. I hated the ache in my chest, but beneath it, a strange calm pulsed. For once, I hadn't folded. For once, I had chosen myself. The quiet in my apartment didn't last long. Just a few days after that showdown at my door, the world outside erupted. I was curled on the couch, crutches leaning against the armrest, a half-empty cup of tea cooling in my hands. The TV murmured in the background, some morning news segment I wasn't paying attention to, until I heard his name. "Breaking story from Houston this morning," the anchor announced, her voice grave. "Jonathan Collins, senior financial manager at Randall and Pierce, has been arrested on multiple charges, including wire fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. Authorities allege the scheme involves millions of dollars diverted through falsified accounts." My heart stopped. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, tea spreading across the rug like a dark stain. I sat frozen, eyes glued to the screen. There was Jonathan's picture. My brother in a tailored suit, the golden boy smile I knew so well. But now it wasn't pride shining around him. It was headlines. The anchor continued. "Court documents suggest this is one of the largest internal fraud cases in Texas in recent years. Collins is currently in custody awaiting arraignment." I felt the room tilt. It was one thing to hear whispers from my parents in a hospital room, another to see it broadcast to the entire state. Jonathan wasn't untouchable anymore. My phone buzzed furiously, text after text from extended relatives, coworkers, even an old classmate from high school. "Is it true? Is that your brother?" Then a call came in, from my father. Against my better judgment, I answered. His voice was sharp, panicked. "Harper, you see what they're saying on the news? It's not true. He didn't do it. They're blowing everything out of proportion." I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my ear. "Dad, they wouldn't put it on live television without evidence. This is serious." "We can fix this," he insisted, his tone hard, as if he was trying to convince himself more than me. "We just need time and money. That's where you—" "No!" I cut him off. My voice was steadier than I expected. "I told you already. I'm not cleaning up his mess." There was a pause, then the low rumble of his fury. "You're cold, heartless. Your brother's life is being ruined, and you care more about your grudge than your family's future." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "Family's future? Dad, when I was lying in that hospital bed, half dead, you chose his award over me. You showed me exactly where your priorities are. Don't lecture me about family." He said nothing for a long moment. Then he muttered, "You'll regret this," and the line went dead. I stared at the dark screen of my phone, my chest heavy but not with guilt, with a strange, painful clarity. Later that night, I checked my email and saw articles piling up, each one more damning. Photos of Jonathan being led out of his office in handcuffs, quotes from former colleagues, speculation about how deep the fraud ran. I thought of my parents, sitting in their Dallas home, blinds drawn, trying to spin the story to anyone who would listen, pretending it was all a misunderstanding, while the truth crawled across every screen in Texas. For once, it wasn't just me who saw the cracks in the Golden Boy's armor. The whole world was watching him fall. And though the shame was theirs to bear, I knew they'd come knocking again, louder, more desperate than ever. The headlines hadn't cooled when a new message popped up in my inbox. I almost deleted it on sight. Unknown sender, subject line blank. But the preview made my stomach lurch. From Jonathan Collins, Inmate Communication Service. My finger hovered over delete. Every instinct screamed, "Don't open it." But curiosity gnawed at me, and against my better judgment, I clicked. The email was long, scattered with typos like it had been hammered out in desperation. "Harper, I don't even know where to start. I never thought I'd be writing you from a place like this. They have me locked up like some kind of monster. But I swear to you, it's not what it looks like. Yes, I was involved. But I wasn't the mastermind. I was set up to take the fall." My chest tightened. I scrolled down, each line heavier than the last. The higher-ups at Randall and Pierce, they've been laundering money for years. I just did the legwork because they told me it was part of my job. When things went south, they needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. You know how Mom and Dad always pushed me to be perfect, to keep the family name spotless? That's why I agreed to things I shouldn't have. I thought I was untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, my breath shallow. For the first time, Jonathan wasn't writing like the Golden Boy. He sounded small, cornered. Then came the part that cut the deepest. I know Mom and Dad have treated you terribly. I know they put me on a pedestal and left you in the shadows. I didn't stop them, and I should have. I was selfish, but please, Harper, you're the only one who can hold this family together now. If you don't help me, everything falls apart. I read that line over and over. You're the only one who can hold this family together. My hands trembled on the keyboard. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Even now, even from behind bars, he wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for salvation, for me to patch together the pieces of a family that had never chosen me. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what help even meant. Did he expect money, connections, a miracle? Did he actually believe I could scrub his crimes clean with his sister's loyalty? Part of me wanted to scream at the screen, "Where were you when I needed you? Where were you when our parents ignored me, when I lay broken and alone?" But another part hesitated. For the first time in our lives, Jonathan admitted it, that he had been the chosen one, that I'd been cast aside. The words I'd waited decades to hear, delivered not in triumph, but in defeat. I sat there for a long time, my cursor blinking at the bottom of the email, my mind spinning. Should I reply? Should I tell him no again, this time with every ounce of fury he deserved? Or should I ignore it? Let the silence speak louder than any words. My phone buzzed with a text from a friend checking in. The contrast was stark, real care versus conditional desperation. I shut the laptop with a snap, my decision half-formed but my heart pounding. I whispered into the empty apartment, as if he could hear me through the walls of his cell. You may finally see the truth about Mom and Dad, but that doesn't erase what you did, or what they did. I can't carry this anymore. I barely slept after Jonathan's email. His words gnawed at me like a parasite. I wasn't the mastermind. I was set up. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as just another excuse. But another part, against my better judgment, wondered if there was something more beneath the surface. The next morning, I packed my laptop in a notepad, determined to trace his story. If he was lying, I needed proof to silence the doubt. If he was telling the truth, then my family was even more toxic than I'd imagined. My first call was to Rachel Myers, an old college friend who now worked as a junior accountant at Randall and Pierce, the very firm where Jonathan had built his shiny career. She hesitated to meet, but when I pressed, reminding her of late-night study sessions and promises never to lie to each other, she agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Midtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and a low hum of conversations that made eavesdropping impossible. Rachel looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder twice before sitting down. "Harper," she whispered, fingers tight around her latte cup. "I shouldn't even be talking to you about this." "Then why did you agree to meet?" I asked gently. She exhaled hard, eyes darting to the window. Because Jonathan wasn't the only one. The partners, they used people like him. Smart, ambitious, desperate to impress. They funneled dirty money through shell companies, and Jonathan, he signed off on a lot of it. Whether he knew what he was signing or not, I can't say. But the fall guy? Yeah, that tracks. They've done it before. Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I gripped the edge of the table. "You're telling me he might not be lying?" Rachel shook her head. "I'm telling you he's not innocent. But he's not the only guilty one. That's how these people operate. Power at the top, pawns at the bottom. And Jonathan, he was both. A pawn who thought he was a king." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw the weight she carried. Fear, guilt, maybe even shame for not speaking up sooner. I wanted to ask more, but she pushed back her chair suddenly. "I've said too much. Please don't drag me into this. I have a family, a job. If they know I talked to you—" She didn't finish the sentence. I sat frozen long after she left, the smell of burnt espresso clinging to the air. For the first time, the narrative shifted. Jonathan wasn't entirely innocent, but maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the monster everyone painted him to be. That night, I combed through old files he had once carelessly left on a shared cloud drive, back when we'd briefly collaborated on a family project. My eyes blurred as spreadsheets unfolded, Cryptic numbers, offshore accounts, company names I didn't recognize. But buried in the chaos, I found a pattern. Transfers that aligned with what Rachel had hinted at. The money trails didn't end with Jonathan. They climbed higher. The realization made my stomach churn. If I followed this path, I wasn't just poking into Jonathan's mess, I was stepping into the crosshairs of powerful people who had everything to lose. Sitting there in the glow of my laptop, I whispered into the silence, do I really want to know all of it? Or am I safer pretending I don't? The cursor blinked back at me, relentless, like Jonathan's plea echoing through the screen. You're the only one who can hold this family together. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was chasing the truth for him or for myself. The glow of my laptop still lingered in the back of my mind long after I shut it down. I couldn't unsee the numbers, the trails that stretched beyond Jonathan, beyond anything I could have imagined. For a moment, I felt like I had been staring into a labyrinth with no exit. That night, I lay awake, the ceiling fan humming above me like a steady reminder that the world outside kept moving while mine stood still. Every vibration of my phone on the nightstand jolted me. Another message from Jonathan. Another desperate plea. I picked it up, thumb hovering over the screen. Harper, please. Don't give up on me. You're the only one who believes I'm not what they say. The words pierced through me. For weeks now, I'd been pulled into his orbit again, orbiting around his needs, his mistakes, his endless justifications. And what had it cost me? My peace, my safety, my chance at a life outside of his shadow. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than to him. I can't do this anymore. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, typing slowly. My fingers shook with every keystroke. Jonathan, I've read your messages. I've looked into things. Maybe you're right. Maybe you were set up. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. I can't fix this for you, and I can't lose myself trying. This will be my last reply. Please don't contact me again. I read it 3 times, my chest tightening each time. Then I hit send. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, waiting for the familiar ping of his response. But nothing came. The silence was deafening, like the world had swallowed his voice whole. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was him. His name flashing across the screen made my stomach twist. I let it buzz until it stopped. When it rang again, I pressed decline. The 3rd time, I picked up, only to say the words I had rehearsed in my head 100 times. Jonathan, stop calling me. We're done. Don't reach out again. My voice broke on the last word, but I forced myself not to apologize, not to take it back. There was a pause on the line. I could hear the faint echo of the prison around him, the buzz of fluorescent lights, a door slamming somewhere far away. Finally, his voice, low and sharp. You think you can walk away from this? You have no idea what you're doing, Harper. I know exactly what I'm doing, I whispered, and hung up. The moment the call ended, my legs gave out. I sank to the floor, clutching the phone like it was both a weapon and a lifeline. Tears slid down my cheeks, not just for him, but for me. For the years I had wasted waiting for him to be someone he could never be. I didn't block his number right away. A part of me still wanted to believe he'd change, that he'd let me go gently. But as the hours passed and silence stretched longer than it ever had before, I realized the only way forward was to shut the door completely. So I did. I blocked his email, his number, every avenue he could use to reach me. With one click after another, I built a wall between us. The air in my apartment felt different after that. Lighter, though still heavy with grief. I sat by the window, watching the city buzz below. Horns, laughter, the rhythm of life moving on. For the first time, I wasn't chained to his downfall. And yet, deep down, I knew cutting him off didn't erase the truth I had uncovered. The numbers, the shell companies, the powerful names buried in his files. I had walked away from Jonathan, but I hadn't walked away from the danger. The following weekend, I decided to do something ordinary, something grounding. I stopped by a small bookstore cafe in Brooklyn, hoping that the smell of coffee and old paper might clear the fog in my chest. For a while, it worked. I lost myself in the sound of the espresso machine and the scratch of pages turning. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an old family friend, Mrs. Atkins, who rarely reached out unless something was seriously wrong. "Harper, honey, I'm so sorry about what your parents have been saying. People talk, but I didn't believe a word of it. Just be careful." My stomach flipped. My parents? Talking? About me? I dialed Mrs. Atkins immediately. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, her voice soft with pity. "Your mom said you've been unstable, that you've invented stories about Jonathan because you're bitter he left. She told people you're, a pause. Mentally fragile." I froze, the world tilting sideways. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My own mother had said that? After hanging up, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I called my parents, my throat burning. Dad answered. "Dad, what the hell are you telling people about me?" His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "We're only trying to protect the family, Harper. You've been airing dirty laundry, dragging Jonathan's name through the mud. He destroyed everything." I cut in, nearly shouting. "He lied, he stole, he used me, and you know it." "Watch your tone," he snapped. "Jonathan is still family, whether you like it or not. People are asking questions. We can't have them thinking you're unwell." Unwell. The word landed like a knife. My chest heaved as I tried to hold back tears. "So instead, you tell them I'm crazy? That's your solution?" Silence on the line. I pictured them in their neat suburban kitchen back in Connecticut, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong while my life unraveled. Mom's voice finally came on, calm but cold. "Harper, you've always been dramatic. You twist things. People worry about you. And we can't keep defending behavior we don't understand. Jonathan made mistakes, but you—" "Stop," my voice cracked. "Do you even hear yourselves? You're choosing him over me." Again. The line went dead. They had hung up. I sat there in the cafe, surrounded by strangers, laughing and clinking cups, while my parents' betrayal echoed louder than the crowd. My vision blurred until the book on the table in front of me was nothing but smudged ink. All my life, I had fought for their approval. Even as a child, I bent myself into knots to win their love. A perfect report card, a spotless room, an obedient smile. And still, it was never enough. Now, as an adult, my worst fear had materialized. They weren't just indifferent. They were actively against me. A young barista came by, noticing my trembling hands. "Miss, are you okay?" I forced a nod. "Yeah, just spilled coffee." But inside, I was collapsing. That evening, the calls started. Cousins, old neighbors, even colleagues. Some offered cautious sympathy, others subtle judgment. The damage had spread fast, like wildfire. My parents' voices carried weight in our community, and every rumor painted me as unstable, bitter, vengeful. By the time I crawled into bed that night, I realized something harsh and undeniable. Jonathan wasn't my only enemy. My own parents had joined the fight against me. And this betrayal cut deeper than anything Jonathan could have ever done. The morning of the sentencing, I sat in the back row of the courtroom, my palms slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. I hadn't slept. For weeks, I told myself this day would finally bring justice, that all the nights of humiliation and betrayal would be balanced by a single word from the judge: guilty. The room smelled of old wood and ink. Lawyers shuffled papers. Reporters whispered among themselves. Jonathan entered in a crisp navy suit, not the orange jumpsuit I had imagined. His hair was neatly combed, his smirk faint but unmistakable. He looked more like a businessman preparing for a meeting than a man about to be punished for fraud and deceit. I felt my chest tighten. When the judge read the charges aloud, the words blurred in my ears. I only caught fragments. Cooperation with authorities, first-time offender, showing remorse. My stomach turned. Remorse? He had shown none. Not to me, not to anyone. Finally, the sentence came. 18 months, with the possibility of parole in 6, a mandatory fine, community service. The gavel struck. The room buzzed. Gasps, murmurs, clicking pens from reporters. To me, the sound was like static, drowning out the last bit of faith I had in the system. 6 months? He could be free in 6 months. I gripped the bench in front of me until my knuckles turned white. Every detail of what he had done, draining accounts, forging signatures, weaving lies, flashed through my mind. The stolen years, the sleepless nights, the fear of losing everything I had worked for. And now, this was all the price he had to pay? As people stood to leave, Jonathan turned slightly in his seat, his eyes locking with mine. That same smug glint, as if to say, I win again. Unbelievable, I whispered under my breath. A woman next to me, another victim who had lost money to his schemes, leaned in. They let him walk. It's always like this. Men like him know how to bend the system. Her voice was bitter but resigned. I shook my head. No, this can't be it. He doesn't get to ruin lives and just move on. My throat ached, but my words carried a fire I hadn't felt in months. Later, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in my face, questions flying. Ms. Grant, do you think the sentence was fair? Do you feel justice was served? What's next for you now that Jonathan's case is closed? I forced myself to answer, though my voice trembled. Fair. He destroyed everything I had, and he'll be out in half a year. If that's justice, then maybe we're all living in the wrong story. My words made the evening news, but at home, when the cameras were gone and the world stopped listening, I broke. I sat in the dark of my tiny apartment, phone buzzing with both sympathy and skepticism, and let the truth sink in. Jonathan had escaped again, not because he was innocent, but because the system let him. And worse, my parents' lies had already softened his image in the community. He wasn't just walking free, he was walking away cleaner than before. I curled into myself on the couch, whispering into the silence, if they won't hold him accountable, I will. The thought scared me, but it also kept me breathing, because if Jonathan could twist the system to his favor, maybe the only weapon left was the truth I still carried. The weeks after Jonathan's sentencing blurred into a gray haze of exhaustion and quiet resolve. I still woke up some mornings with the echo of the gavel ringing in my ears, that hollow verdict replaying like a cruel joke. But each day, I pushed myself to move forward, one step at a time. Instead of scrolling endlessly through articles about Jonathan's cooperation, or the public gossip fueled by my parents' whispers, I poured my energy into rebuilding the life he tried to shatter. I started small. I rearranged my apartment, boxed up memories that still stung, and opened the curtains wide to let in light. Then I went back to teaching part-time at the community center, a place that had once felt like my anchor. The children's laughter, their stubborn resilience when they stumbled over words or paintbrush strokes. It reminded me of something simple but vital. Broken doesn't mean finished. One afternoon, as I guided a little boy through spelling his name, his smile brighter than any courtroom victory, I realized this was what survival looked like. Not erasing the past, but building despite it. Still, my parents lingered in the background like storm clouds. Their campaign to smear me hadn't stopped, but instead of feeding their narrative with my silence, I wrote my own. I sat at my laptop late into the night, typing my story piece by piece. Every betrayal, every moment of doubt, every ember of courage I had to summon. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth had its own fire. Weeks later, I pressed publish. The response startled me. Emails from strangers poured in. People who had been betrayed by loved ones, silenced by family, dismissed by courts. Your story is mine, one woman wrote. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. Reading their words, I felt something shift. My pain wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a bridge. One evening, as autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalks, I met Maya, the same friend who had offered her couch when everything first collapsed. Over steaming mugs of coffee, she looked at me and said, You know, Harper, I don't think you realize how strong you've become. You don't just survive, you fight, and you bring people with you. I smiled, though tears pricked my eyes. Maybe, but it doesn't feel like fighting anymore. It feels like living again. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. That's the point. And in that quiet moment, Surrounded by the hum of the cafe and the ordinary beauty of life moving on, I finally believed her. If you've stayed with me through this journey, here's what I've learned. Sometimes justice doesn't look the way we want it to. Sometimes the people who should protect you, family, partners, even the law, turn their backs. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. I discovered that healing isn't about waiting for an apology or a verdict. It's about taking back your voice piece by piece until the noise of lies can't drown it out anymore. It's about setting boundaries so firm that even blood ties can't break them. And most of all, it's about finding the courage to begin again, not because the past disappears, but because you decide it won't define the rest of your story. If you're listening and carrying your own scars, I hope my story reminds you you can start over. You can rewrite the ending. You are stronger than the people who tried to silence you. If this resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and share this story so it reaches someone who might need it today. And leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your own stories, or even just a reminder that none of us are truly alone.